everybody. So, welcome to my show. So, this is Rise and Shine with Lacey Jeter. And so, on this show, I talk about various things. I talk about news, I talk about pop culture, I talk about current events, and I also talk about Black history and the history of the United States as well. So, I'm actually starting this new thing I want to do on Sundays on Rise and Shine with Lacey Jeter. And this new thing I want to do, I want to start having Black History Sunday. All right. So, Black History Sundays, I'm going to be dedicating my shows to talking about, the importance of this country, like how African Americans have paved the way for this country, and just talking about the turning points and the important events that has happened in history. So, today's show, my first Black History Sunday, today I wanted to talk about the Loving versus Virginia court case of 1967. All right. Because that court case has definitely paved the way for romantic relationships in this country because it was the legalization of interracial marriage. All right. And just to let you know, before that court case, in some areas in the United States, it was legal to be married and it was okay to date interracially. But in a lot of the southern states, it was illegal. Right. And so this case really was a big deal and it really created a turning point when it comes to the history of this country. Right. As we know, interracial relationships are growing so quickly, y'all. Right. Interracial relationships are really a big thing now. A lot of people are interested in it. People are opening up their minds. Specifically with Black women. Black women are opening up their options to dating interracially. And me covering this is not me saying that we should not date within our race, because obviously I love Black men. I will always be there for my Black men. But I wanted to cover this because I just thought this case was very interesting to me. And I also love talking about interracial relationships. I just like talking about it. I've created a lot of content in the past when it came to interracial relationships. So, yeah, I've talked about it on TikTok. I've definitely made my content dealing with it, if that makes any sense. So, Loving versus Virginia. Right. So it all started in 1958 when we had this lovely couple, right? So we had this couple here, and they were, like I said, they were from Virginia, and they actually grew up together. It's Richard Loving and Mildred Jeter, which she has the same last name as me, but it's just spelled different. Like my Jeter is spelled Getter. Her Jeter is spelled Jeter. So I thought that was kind of funny. And it's actually really funny to me. What really stood out to me with this case was that Loving, Richard's last name, it just feels like it's God sent. Like, right? I'm like, so happened a man with the last name of Loving comes on this comes into this universe, right? He is born into this world, and he so happens to be the trailblazer and the reason why interracial relationships are even legal now. Like it just, to me, it's just like it's perfect. It's like God definitely sent him here, right? So people who want to talk about interracial relationships are wrong, or that it's not humane, or all those things that people shouldn't be mixing, whatever. Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that this man's last name was Loving. I don't know. I'm just like that. If y'all don't believe in God, I mean, that is proof that God is real, right? Because why? Why is that so happened to be? So, like I said, they were both born and raised in Virginia, right? They were actually raised in the area was very diverse, actually, during that time, right? It was actually quite diverse in that community that they were both in. But what they ended up doing, because it was illegal in Virginia to get married outside of your race. They ended up going to Washington, D.C., and they ended up getting married there, right? So they ended up getting married in Washington, D.C., and they came back home, right? I think months later, they just got a random knock on the door by a police officer. And the police officer locked both of them up or arrested them, right? Because in Virginia, interracial relationships and marriages were illegal, right? So, what ended up happening? So, they either got a decision to go to jail for 1 year, right? Go to prison for 1 year, or they had to move to Washington, D.C. and not come back to Virginia for the next 25 years, right? So that was their decision. So they decided to move to Washington, D.C., right? But they missed Virginia. They loved Virginia, and they're like, I don't want to have to live in Washington, D.C. They really weren't feeling it, right? They ended up having children and all of that. So, right? So they ended up getting in touch with Robert Kennedy, right? And so then they go into the process of trying to overturn or trying to get their rights to live in Virginia and be happily married, right? So that's when this whole thing happens. This whole court case happens, right? And at the time, it was a big deal, right? At the time, it was a big deal. It got national attention, this couple in this court case, right? And so, what the court ended up coming to the conclusion of, it actually broke the rights, right? It was the equal protection clause, which is, the court said laws banning interracial marriage were based on racial discrimination and had no legitimate purpose, making them unconstitutional. I think it's the anti-miscegenation laws. It was the anti-miscegenation laws that was the problem, right? Once this case happened, right, all the anti-miscegenation laws actually got overturned in the United States. Like I said at the beginning, there were places in the United States where it was legal to marry interracially. It just was not around the entire USA. It wasn't the entire United States, right? So this court case was the reason where it became USA wide. You're able to interracially get married or be in interracial relationships, right? So, I think they were even on the cover of Time magazine and, all of these things. So they had a really good case. I'm going to show this video.
On July 11th,
Sorry, y'all. I'm going to show this video in just a second, talking more about it, because I probably missed some points. But I really wanted to, like I said, I wanted to cover this case because I just thought it was very interesting. And after I cover it, I'm going to talk about my personal just opinions and my personal points about interracial relationships. So here's the video.
On July 11th, 1958, at 2 a.m., a county sheriff entered the home of Virginia couple Richard and Mildred Loving, forced them out of their bed, and placed them under arrest. Their crime? Interracial marriage. This is the story of Loving versus Virginia and the landmark civil rights decision that would set an important precedent for marriage rights in America. Richard, who was white, and Mildred, who was Black and Native American, spent the early morning hours of July 11th in jail. They were tried and found guilty of violating Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924, a series of laws that made race mixing illegal. The Lovings were then given an ultimatum: spend 1 year in prison or leave the state of Virginia for 25 years. Frightened and unaware of their legal options, they moved to Washington, D.C., where their marriage was legal. They raised their 3 children in the nation's capital, financially strapped and isolated from friends and family. 5 years later, they returned to Virginia to visit Mildred's relatives, but were arrested for a second time for traveling together. Inspired by the burgeoning civil rights movement, Mildred decided to fight back. So in 1963, she wrote a letter to U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy asking for his advice. Kennedy referred the Lovings to the American Civil Liberties Union, who assigned their case to two young lawyers named Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf. Cohen and Hirschkopf took their appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed African Americans citizenship and all its privileges. The broad and sweeping language of the amendment, they argued, made no mention of interracial marriage, and thus guaranteed equal protection of a human being's right to marry. Attorneys from the state of Virginia argued that the state's rights should be prioritized over federal laws. But the argument didn't hold up. On June 12, 1967, the court unanimously struck down the Virginia marriage ban and overturned the Lovings' conviction. The court ruling reverberated across America, invalidating anti-miscegenation laws not only in Virginia, but in 16 other states that held them as well. After winning their case, the Lovings were finally free to do what they wanted to do all along. They lived quietly in Virginia as husband and wife until Richard's death in 1975. Loving versus Virginia would inspire gay marriage advocates during their own Supreme Court victories decades later. For example, 2003's Lawrence versus Texas decision ruled that a Texas statute criminalizing sexual activity between members of the same sex was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court would directly cite Loving in two subsequent landmark cases that paved the way for same-sex marriage. The first was 2013's United States versus Windsor, which struck down a key part of the Defense of Marriage Act. And the second was Obergefell versus Hodges, a 2015 ruling which granted same-sex couples around the nation the right to marry. Few cases are so appropriately named as Loving versus Virginia, a case about one couple's brave fight to validate their love in the eyes of the law. Loving versus Virginia forever redefined marriage in the United States.
All right. All right. So that's a little bit about that case. I thought it was really interesting. So it's interesting because lately, like with the way this country has been shifting and everything going on with this country, right? I've noticed there has been such an increase in just overt, open racism, unfortunately. Um, and it's not okay. As a black woman, it's not okay. And as a black woman, I question myself. I'm like, where is this country going? Because we kind of lost the plot. Um, people are just so openly racist. And I live currently in South Carolina, right? So I live in a southern state, right? Um, the core of racism lives in the South. It just does. Um, and people have been so overtly racist. And actually, even before this new administration, people were racist. Like I went through quite a few situations, more so workplace type of situations. It wasn't really like big jobs, but I would have little like side jobs or whatever. And the food industry, and I experienced quite a lot of just nastiness in those situations I went through. It was working as server, host, bartending. I just went through a whole lot of nastiness way I was treated as a black woman. And I just really pray and hope that this country does better. That's all I can do, right? But people who sit on the internet and who gaslight black women and tell us that we don't need to date outside of our race, or that it's not okay, right? That we need to just settle. And at the end of the day, I love me a good black relationship. I love black men. But black women, go where you're appreciated. Honestly, go where you're appreciated, because love does not get defined by somebody's skin color. It's just people who have the belief that skin color is everything with love. No. When you really love somebody, you don't see their color, right? This is somebody who has interracially dated. I have interracially dated a few times. I've talked to white guys, I've been in relationships with a couple white guys. And in my experiences with them, I never felt like I cared about their skin color. When I was with him, I didn't that was the last thing on my mind, honestly. And at the end of the day, you deserve to be treated with respect, right? You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to be appreciated. You deserve to be treated with kindness, right? And it's so sad because there's a lot of people in this world who are just evil spirited, mean spirited. And that's one issue I have with the dating world now is that I feel like a lot of people are mean spirited. A lot of people are not genuine, unfortunately, right? People are playing games. People are lying. People are cheating, right? People are dating people for the wrong reasons. Um People aren't being straightforward. I think it's so important to have these conversations. And that's why I want to have the Black History Sundays, because as hard as it is to have these conversations about race, it is so necessary. And there's so much healing that takes place when you have these type of conversations. Healing does not take place in comfortability. Healing does not take place when you're comfortable. Healing takes place when you have those uncomfortable conversations. Be like, these are my biases. I do have unconscious biases, right? I do have these subconscious programs about people of color, right? I do. And it's okay to admit those things, but as long as you're doing the work to become better, that's good, because none of us come from perf- a perfect family. Some people come from a family that is so rooted in racism and colorism, right? And that's what they were taught. Racism is taught. It's not something that just exists, right? If you look at babies and children playing, right? A lot of the time, the children and the babies are not caring about the other person's skin color until they're raised in a household that makes color a big deal. Until they are raised around parents and family members who constantly talk about race, that's when children start to care about race. But when a child is at their youngest and before they've dealt with the brainwashing and the hatred of the world, and before they've seen all this, they don't care about race. It's not something that is even important, right? And there have been many times I felt I've been through some things where God really forced me to challenge people, challenge the status quo, right? um I had to challenge people. I had to stand up for myself. It was not comfortable, it was not fun, but I'm glad I did it, because that was my job, right? That is my job, because when you speak up, it helps somebody else, right? If you're going through something, someone else is going through that same thing, right? But I think it is important to have these conversations and to just be transparent and to be authentic and be like, I do struggle with this, right? I was raised with this, right? We all do that, right? And it is not necessarily something that I'm necessarily. I don't want people to look at this and be like, oh, I'm begging for that. Like, I'm desperate for that, right? I'm desperate to get have conversation with people. No, I'm just saying that conversations are so important to have to go through the healing, right? To be able to move on, to be able to move forward and all these things. But yes, other than that, that's all I'm going to be covering today, y'all. I hope y'all kind of enjoyed this mini history lesson. Again, I got to get prepared to clock in for my job. So, I be trying to keep these things pretty short, right? So, you guys, I hope y'all continue to look at my content. I hope you subscribe, follow. Definitely like. It's highly appreciated when people really engage in my content. I want people to engage. I want there to be a community here. I want to build a community of people who, are looking at my content, who really get excited about my content. So yeah, I don't even know what to say. I don't know. I'm probably like jumping around my words this morning, but yeah. And you can follow me on TikTok, follow me on Facebook, follow me on YouTube, and everything. So I wish y'all a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.